Good evening all on live stream as well as Play Chess server. So welcome to this week's radio show. So as a change from Mikhail Tal, and we'll probably be going back to Tal soon, but we're going to choose a player with a different kind of style, equally effective in terms of getting to become world chess champion. So there's different ways of skinning the cat if you want to become a world chess champion. So, the first game of my selection is against Talsht, played in Moscow, 1957. I just want to make sure, is the previous show nearly finished, do you think? Did any of you come from that, from the previous show? I wonder if I should wait a minute or two longer. Sorry about that. On just interrupted the board there. Okay, so I'm just arranging my windows. Okay, right. Or we can start going through this game, I think, maybe. So Petrosian playing black will flip the board. Oh, it's finished. Good. Okay, so we're going to flip the board. And Petrosian playing black, 1957. Okay. So this shows... This was quite an attractive game. I've briefly played through all the games about to show you, and I think they're quite attractive in different ways. So as black, Petrosian's often quite dangerous, actually. So e4, e5. And after knight f3, knight c6, we have this... c3 move, which now forgive me if this is incorrect. Is it Ponziani opening? What's the name of this opening? I should have really looked it up when white plays c3 here early. So interesting third move. Does anyone know? Ponziani, is it, or something else? Anyone? c3? Has anyone tried it? Anyone tried this move as white? Okay, we can look it up after if no one knows, or just say if you do look it up now, that'd be great. But Petrosian, he just actually developed his knight to attack the e pawn, and white ignored that. White played d4, and there's already a kind of critical decision actually, because Petrosian doesn't really want to release the release tension here, because white will be getting a strong centre. He'll be justifying his opening, I think. So basically he played d6, which kind of invites potentially the exchange of queens, but I think white would lose some of the advantage if he exchanged queens. And he did something which a King's Indian player would sort of lick their lips now, is seeing this move d5, because really it closes up the position. And if you're a King's Indian player, you'll like this structure. If white plays c4, okay, he's used two moves to get to c4, and then later maybe you can, play, for f5 later once you move the knight. So it can be sort of King's Indian strategy applied. So the knight retreat's no big deal. Tempo is no big deal when the centre's like closed and locked up like this. Now this knight can always even, reroute anyway, maybe even to c5 later. So bishop d3, and we see the King's Indian strategy start to evolve now. Oh, sorry, Nick on livestream says it is a Ponziani. Okay, this c3 system. But here I think, black's okay. He's going for a King's Indian now with g6. So a transposition kind of to a sort of strange King's Indian. h3, knight bd7. Now bishop e3, and this configuration isn't sort of usual for a King's Indian. In fact, the bishop on e3 might not be ideally placed, because later if black wants to play f5, then f4 might be dangerous. Something to bear in mind anyway. Bishop g7. Okay. Knight d2. Now an immediate knight h5, because actually this f4 square is a bit more vulnerable than usual, because if the knight goes to f4, g3 is sometimes going to be a problem to play. Well, the knight will be also attacking some squares, but sometimes if this bishop is on h3, then h3 is going to be more of a target. So white didn't want the knight coming in to f4 anyway. He played actually g3. And now Petrosian castles. Queen e2. As though castling queenside is on the cards. So will the king be safe on the queen side? Now c6, as if, you know, trying to tear open some lines. You know, even if white castled queenside, you know, the c-file might be good. c4, but now actually instead of taking on d5, Petrosian closes up the queenside with c5. So he establishes a greater grip on d4, but also we have the potential now. This pawn being restrained means a6 and b5 is going to be a good plan to undermine like this. So castles at now a6. And now white proceeds to try and sort of get some sort of kingside attack maybe later. h4. And a surprise move now from Petrosian changes the picture of this position quite significantly. So a tactical move showing Petrosian still, you know, even though he had quite a positional refined style, you know, he was tactically aware a great deal of all the possibilities. So there's a nice move which he played now. Can any of you on live stream guess it, or the Play Chess server? Can you guess the next move without looking at the score sheet? If there's some way of covering up the score sheet for these games, please can you do that so we can play this, you know, guess the next move. So I'll give you all 10 seconds starting from now. So 10 seconds starting from now. What was Petrosian's next move? Okay, someone's guessed it. Stefan 23, well done. Knight f4. Because actually it could stretch open the bishop on b2, which is tactically significant now. White did take. You know, he doesn't really want to sort of move his queen, because maybe you know, knight takes d3 is pleasant, getting that bishop, or there might be even a better move actually. So he took bishop f4. Now the point is revealed. Hope you can spot this next move. Okay, queen f6. So threatening mate and threatening the bishop. So he's getting back his material. So the rook moves to g1, giving the king a flight square d1 now. Queen takes f4. And we have here a strategic implication now that, you know, look at this bishop, fantastic bishop. Look at e5, fantastic e5 square on a semi-open file. So nice Benoni type thing. White's attack, is it going to be that dangerous for the king? I wouldn't have thought so, because black's also threatening to peel open the queen side. So black sits comfortably here. h5 anyway, as if an attack might be on the horizon, but you know, black can be vigorous now with b5. hg, hg, and the king makes a flee threat, you know, king d1, offering in fact b2, but Petrosian's not interested in that at the moment. He plays queen f6. He's more interested in taking with his queen. It would be more dangerous to take with the queen perhaps. Knight g5. So there's numerous threats now, like maybe knight h7 to fork queen and rook. So the rook moves actually away. Maybe that's one point of rook e8. Rook h4, as though the rook's going to be doubled. So is Petrosian worried? He plays actually knight b6. So he's got his own counter attack. After bishop c2. Now he takes on c4. At the moment, the rook cannot move to h1 anyway. You know, the queen can take it, and then there's nothing here. This Finch-out bishop is defending everything at the moment. So e5, which vacates e4, which looks kind of dangerous to vacate e4. Rook takes e5, knight d4. So white's increased the scope of his pieces, and the two knights are supporting each other. So maybe, you know, doubling rooks, you might think is on the cards. f4, but remember d5 is now under attack. and it's sacrificed. So has white gone a bit crazy? Talsht. Rook takes d5. Bishop f5. So the central pressure is being exerted now, and of course black can maybe do this to exert more pressure. Rook finally goes to the h file. Now a vicious move actually is played, interfering with the queen and bishop. Rook d2, because you know the bishop will be on c2, so maybe knight takes, there's queen takes, and bishop takes c2 after. So the queen goes to f3, but now f6, and it looks a bit precarious now, with the white king still stranded in the center. It goes to f1 now, losing a piece. Fg, check. Is this dangerous? Not really, but it means actually the check actually surprisingly gives is going to take the rook. So this was calculated as not really a problem. The king coming here, rook h8, and now a beautiful move by Petrosian to finish the game here with fast speed for his own final assault attacking move. If I give you 10 seconds, can you spot it? What was played here? Okay. Anyone? Take a guess. What did black play here? Yeah, I've been recommending on my YouTube channel recently the idea of looking for forcing moves, which I've called a docking computer, and the most forcing type of forcing moves are checks. So there's a key check here. If you examine all the checks, there's one check here, but that doesn't really do much maybe, but there's another check here. And which one do you think was used? There aren't too many checks. There's rook, I suppose there's check. Okay, there's a few checks to check out. But actually, okay, bishop d3 check was the one used, because basically the queen wants to come to f4 to mate, you know, with f2. So that's pretty, you know, much game over. If the king goes here, you know, queen d4 check, and then mating on f2. In fact, that's mate. Sorry, pardon me. That's mate because the bishop's on f1. So it's bishop d3 is a killer. You know, if takes, then queen takes f4, and then mating. Okay, let's have a quick overview and summary of this game. So what we saw here was Petrosian sort of transposing the unusual Ponziani opening into a kind of King's Indian type strategy. So he's a master of closed positions and manoeuvring, but on the lookout still, especially for strategically important tactics. So knight f4 was actually a strategically important tactic because it created more dark square pressure, it got control of the e5 square, and it extended the scope of the bishop. So strategically it's ticking a lot of boxes, isn't it? This move, knight f4, it's not just a tactical move, it's kind of a positional move, positional combination. And his king safety was kind of guaranteed. It wasn't looking too shaky. White tried to complicate things. White's like a fearsome attacking player, I believe, Talsht, but he wasn't able to sort of get too much counterplay here because, you know, black did have a good grip on the position, but he did try hard to tear open lines. It's just that okay, queen f3 with this knight f6 just wasn't good enough. Petrosian didn't mind, you know, what would happen here after taking check. He's winning two knights after all for the rook, and the queen and the rooks are not coordinating. You know, the bishop's protecting. You know, there's enough defense, and this is a fast finish with bishop d3. Okay. So I hope maybe you got something from that game. If nothing else, you've got a system now against c3. You just casually play this and not mind the exchange of queens or the closing of position. So anyway, let's go on to another game. Okay, this time against a fearsome Boris Spassky, played in Moscow, 1966. Okay, so against Boris, d4 was played by Boris. Knight f6, knight f3. So we're getting actually what's called, I think it's Torre attack, bishop g5. Torre attack. So d5, knight d2. Now white's setup, he does sort of develop, this bishop often here and this bishop's outside the pawn chain. This is a simple thing to play, this Torre attack. Simple and annoying. So it's got all the pieces out for white. Now Petrosian's setup looks set for sort of trying to control e4 maybe. So it looks like this. Trying to exert pressure on the centre and e4 in particular. Now Boris doesn't mind accepting here double pawns. He plays actually knight e5. So he's not too concerned about the doubling of pawns. Maybe he thinks he's got some dynamic potential brewing here. But anyway, Petrosian, he does take on e5 and then play knight d7. So we've got the double pawns and we've got an attack on the bishop. So the bishop retreats actually to f4. Okay. Now e5 is a bit of a target. Queen c7. And note, the black king hasn't castled yet. Doesn't have to castle kingside. He could castle queenside. Remember, this bishop could also be a tempo gainer potentially. If the white king's over here, not only attacking the bishop, but also maybe trying to get an attack on the white king is on the cards potentially. But is it in Petrosian's style in 1966 to go for such an attack? An attacking scheme? Isn't he just a boring positional player? Have I biased the game choices by finding attacking games? After knight f3, Petrosian simply plays h6, as though really he's going to go for an attack. Okay, so b4, and he does go for the attack. g5, he's going for an attack, and he's not even bothering to castle. h5, threatening to trap the bishop with h4. So the bishop's, threatened now with dear life. So white plays h4 to try and stop that threat. And now we're getting a semi-open g-file against white's king. So g takes h4, bishop f4, and the attacking player would start to wake up now in this position. And this is a Petrosian game. So what's going on here? He castles queenside. So this is a guarantee of an exciting game, that both sides are opposite each other. Black's got this seemingly dangerous g-file, and this all came from a Torre attack. It seems maybe we can start to have some regret. Boris can have some regret for his knight e5, not maybe realising this would be a consequence. But he tries to attack on the queen side. He plays a4, but is this plan a bit slow? He's got to try and open the lines against black king. But Petrosian blocks the lines, but he does concede the d4 square with his next move, c4. So although he's closing lines, maybe d4 might be useful, but if it's not blockaded, then we've got a potential attack brewing up here. If black can play d4 later. Bishop e2, and now against a5, maybe b5 a6 is annoying. So this is ruled out now. a6 to stop white playing potentially a6. So if a5 b5, if b5 a5, we've got our responses to keep the position closed, to keep the king safe here. So king h1, white's waiting around now, and black is able to attack. And look, how can you get to the black king here? It's pretty tricky. If you were white, would you be slightly worried in this position? How can you open the lines against Petrosian's king? It's difficult, isn't it? Rook dg8, and also he's brewing his attack. He's simply going to double rooks. He's going to exert more pressure on g2. He's going to threaten d4 potentially if it's not blockaded, to extend the scope of the bishop right onto your king here. So rook g1. So this is kind of prophylaxis. These two are defensive prophylaxis. B5, a5, a5, b5. Just a reminder. So rook g4, and in the meantime he's doubling up rooks. Queen d2, very simple, very logical play. a5 and now b5, so locking up the position. Okay, rook a d1. Okay, now what can black do though? How can black make progress here? The pawn sack's pretty harmless. White could just take that and not really have to worry. What he does actually now is bishop f8. So what on earth is bishop f8 up to? Maybe he's sneaking around with bishop to go here to attack e5. e5 is a bit vulnerable. If he's got 3 things on e5, maybe that's a bit vulnerable. Is that the idea? Well, actually, Boris, he plays knight h2 now. And Petrosian has the option of like moving the rook. But if he moves the rook, you know, maybe, just maybe, bishop takes h5 is not so crazy. But instead, he leaves the rook there because actually, if something captures, then we'll be undoubling the pawns in any case. So this knight takes e5 is like winning 2 pawns in a way, because the exchange sack is like undoubling the pawns now. We've undoubled the pawns here, and we've won a central pawn. Also, the blockade, the knight blockade possibility is gone, so we've still got this possibility of extending the scope of the bishop. And also, not only that, is h3. So this is very dangerous for white now, the exchange up. So it's like an exchange for 2 pawns almost. And still, white hasn't really got any attacking prospects here. So e4 was played now. Okay, we've got to be careful as black here though. What does e4 do? You know, maybe it's giving some scope for the queen to invade. What's the idea? If d takes, maybe actually immediately bishop takes, queen d7 check. So he's got to be careful here to keep things closed. He can't just take that pawn. He plays bishop d6. Okay, queen e3. As though maybe, you know, the queen's going to cheekily invade, possibly. That's not really a threat, though. I don't think that's the major idea behind queen e3. Knight d7. So he's on the bishop. What does the bishop do? Takes on d6. And now rook d4. Now the pawns are potentially, you know, mobile in the centre. The mobility is expressed now. The pawns lust to expand. e5. And now a beautiful move. You know, trying to expand in the centre with a temporary pawn sacrifice. I wonder if you guys can guess this next move. I've given a clue here when I say temporary pawn sack. So I've given you 10 seconds. What would you play here as black? Okay, sorry, I've probably misled you with temporary pawn sack. There aren't too many temporary pawn sacks available. You might have considered d4, but actually it was f5 that was played. f5. f5. Okay. And here e takes d5 was chosen. And f4, so the pawns are getting more mobile against, you know, maybe the white king. Queen e4, knight f6, the queen's evicted to the checking square. But it doesn't matter about the king moving, because now look, the bishop can come back to attack that queen. f3, bishop c8, queen's evicted. And now Petrosian doesn't mind, again, locking down the pawn chain. Look at this, g3. So we've got a locked pawn chain here, and we've got a locked pawn chain here. The thing is, black maintains the most important strategic break, h3. So white is a bit helpless in this blocked situation without much counterplay. Rook e1, h3. Okay, bishop f1, and now rook h8. Nasty threats against white's king. White's really helpless without much play. G takes, and the final breakthrough to the king is transpiring now. Bishop takes, removing a defensive piece. And now another temporary pawn sacrifice is used to open up a few more lines, get a few more squares, critical squares, and increase pawn mobility a little bit more if it was dared to be taken. e4. Okay. Actually, if rook takes or whatever, there's rook check, winning the queen. So the rook cannot leave the first rank here. And if takes here, then, you know, maybe f3 threatening mate the pawns would be providing a kind of mating net here. If we had 2 pawns here and here. So queen d1, trying to defend, but now getting in that f3 move with style, knight g4, forcing through f3. So takes now f3, and we have the major implication now of rook h1 mating. Look at these pawns, just covering all the squares. Poor king. Rook g2 offering a rook. It's taken. And here actually, Boris resigned. So how would it have gone? So let's say takes, I think, check. And maybe, you know, a crushing move here. And I haven't computer checked this, but possibly, I don't know what you guys think. This looks pretty strong. Queen h6. What do you think? Just, it looks like it's mating. Queen h6. So this looks crushing, and if king g1, we have the same idea of either queen h6 immediately, or maybe check, and queen h6. Probably queen h6 immediately is stronger. So that was quite a crushing game there. Sorry, after check. Sorry, someone's saying rook h1. You wouldn't play queen h6 here? Is there something wrong with queen h6? Isn't that crushing as well? Maybe queen... If queen h6, maybe... There isn't queen f3. The pawn's on f3. So that looks pretty crushing as well, as superficially. So what happened in this game? Basically, Petrosian... you know, he played an exciting game. You know, he waited for White's castle kingside. He hadn't committed his king. So his positional play is delaying the king placement. Doesn't have to castle routinely kingside. He played bishop b7, another waiting move. The problem with knight e5, it's leverage for black for his kingside pawn advances. So queen c7, he's got a ready-made attack with tempo now to attack that bishop for dangerous play. But h6, and he's keeping, the way he keeps the queen side closed is very, very nice. So he opens up the king side, and it's no surprise actually. I think Petrosian is missing Nimzovich, is one of his like heroes and influences. We see in many Nimzovich games the same kind of idea that really no counterplay is given to the opponent on the queen side, and Nimzovich is just ploughing in to White's king on the king side. That happens a lot in some key Nimzovich games as well. So really, you know, black is beyond defeat here on the queen side when he locks up the position and makes sure he's got the ability to lock up the position even more, to make sure no lines are being opened to his king. And then he starts to intensify the pressure. And positional sacrifices are used to emphasize his trump cards here of the position. He's increasing the pawn mobility a lot, undoubling pawns, gaining a valuable centre pawn. So his own pawn mobility is becoming critical now in the centre. So after knight d7, the pawns are ready to roll. They're ready to roll forward here. Bishop d6, okay, so White's getting weaker on the dark squares. And now this f5. So this is pretty dangerous stuff. E takes d5 was chosen. We didn't really look at this, but I expect this to be quite dangerous because of things like h3 and d4, you know, opening up the bishop potentially. So that probably was unpalatable to Boris. So he took like this, and still the pawns were very mobile here. So after f3, these locked pawn chains didn't really offer White much counterplay, and Black was just able to just break through now on the king side, just removing a few more key defensive pieces. Another positional pawn sack to increase mobility, a knight sack for these fantastic pawns on the 6th rank, which forced White to lose a rook. Now this final little, you know, this is resignable. It was resigned here. Okay. I thought that was an attractive game. So we see Petrosian attacking with black there, casting queenside. So let's look at another game. Okay, this... Whoops, pardon me. Okay. Vasyukov against Petrosian. So 1970, Capablanca, 1970. Petrosian playing black, plays the French defense. And which variation? After knight c3, he's got the choice of the classical, or does he choose the Winnower? Actually, in this game, he chooses the Winnower variation. So not a lot of analysis probably done by Botvinnik in the 1960s on the Winnower, in particular onwards. So Winnower was quite popular by this time. e5, c5, mainline Winnower, a3. He takes on c3, and this is one of the older lines now, not so trendy now, but I think it's a very playable move. The idea of queen c7. So queen c7 indirectly adds support for g7 because black has either f6 or f5, which would support g7. Not only that, the queen is also eyeing c3 potentially. So queen c7 is a bit of a nifty move. I don't know if any of you have played queen c7 here. One of my fellow clubmates, Paul Georgiou, I think it was one of his favoured moves as well. Maybe he has studied Petrosian. Certainly other players in my chess club have studied Petrosian as well. But queen c7 is not going in for these like Gambit lines, these trendy Gambit lines where you might be giving up g7. No. Queen g4, forget giving up g7, just play f5. So we have here a locked pawn structure again. So the g7 pawn is simply protected. Queen g3. C takes d4. C takes d4. Now knight e7. Actually, is the pawn able to be taken now? Probably not, because rook g8, and then it's looking dangerous for queen c3 checks. In fact, queen c3 check first, and if bishop d2, there's another check on a1, and then you could do something about the queen. So bishop d2. Now he castles. Bishop d3. And now a painful move for the attacking player is white, b6, because really black really wants to get rid of this bad bishop in inverted commas and get rid of white's attacking potential. You know, this bishop represents attacking potential. It's coordinated with the pawn chain. You've got pawns on dark squares. It's a complementary bishop to the pawns on dark squares, and it's horrible to have that removed with bishop a6. But that is what is about to happen here, because as well as removing that bishop, strategically you get access to more light squares, particularly c4 will become more vulnerable if you can get these light square bishops off. Oh, sorry, someone asked what about en passant? En passant was possible, not the best for white. Yeah, it's a theoretical thing. Okay. We could have a brief... Should we quickly just go back for the en passant idea? Sorry, f5. If e takes, I think just knight takes. It's pretty okay for black. So okay, so let's go back to this position. b6. So he wants to get rid of the light square bishops. Knight e2 and bishop a6, and it's a comfortable position for black again. And we can't really say here, does white have too many opportunities to win this game? Where are the open lines against black's king? If you look at Petrosian's games, was he ever in any danger of losing? That seems to be a question here. probably not much. But is e6, the weakness of this last move is always e6. Once you move that bishop, isn't e6 targetable? Knight f4 targeting e6, queen d7. Okay, bishop b4, a bit of pressure it seems. What's the immediate threat here? What is white actually threatening? White might be threatening knight h5, threatening mate, and also knight f6 check, forking king and queen. So we need a bit of prophylaxis against knight h5. So he plays actually rook f7. Okay. If black can carry out this strategic plan, get rid of the light square bishops without being mated, he should be okay. But h4, so he gets rid of the light square bishops. Now knight c6. Has the knight got a future? Is the knight going to go round to c4 maybe? h5. Which does introduce possibly, the idea of knight g6 in some lines. And also, maybe, white could think about this. But it's all a bit slow maybe. Rook c8. And he does go actually for rook h3. Sorry, Omig writes, what if 12 c3 instead of knight e2? Sorry, was that on this game? 12, sorry about that. 12 c3 instead of knight e2. In this position, c3 here, let's just briefly check this. I think that's asking more for bishop a6, because c4, I think bishop a6 is even more attractive. Sorry about that, I missed that question. So let's go back here. So rook g3, and then he gets that c4 square. Sorry, he retreats the knight now, so he's protecting e6. He's got his points covered. He's protecting g7. Rook g3, now rook c4. Now with rook c4, what is black up to with rook c4? We're about to find out, I'm sure. So h6. Okay, rook c4, basically he's putting pressure on d4. So a knight c6 is going to prompt c3 actually as it goes. Or is it? White ignores it, goes for the attack, knight h5. And this now represents actually a positional exchange sacrifice. Because of this horrible threat, it seems, of knight f6. So he's going to do a positional exchange sack. He's playing knight. He's allowing knight f6, winning the exchange. But if he wins d4, we've got a situation like the previous game. It's almost like an exchange for two pawns, because the centre pawn is going to drop as well. That's one of the important compensations for the exchange sack here as well. That a centre pawn is dropping. d4 is potentially dropping, or is it? If white had played c3, then maybe a5 is also on the cards. So queen d2, he takes on d4. Could he have played c3? Let's just briefly check. a5, because the bishop can actually go to e7 maybe. He wasn't really that tempted by this. I think maybe black doesn't even need to win that pawn. He just takes here, okay, and it's still okay. But what he played, he's losing the centre pawn. So rook d3, rook h4 with nasty threats. Not here, it's protected, but check to win the rook. Rook h3. Rook g4. Yeah, he's still got the f pawn in this variation. That f pawn, but he's lost his centre pawn. King f1. And now even worse, it's not just c4 that's the problem. e4 is another light square of value. Knight d6. So this knight's going to be huge on e4 potentially. Rook e1. And the king actually comes to blockade the f pawn with king f7. So where is white's attack? All the lines are closed to the black king. So maybe if you're in a situation in your own games where you seem to be getting attacked all the time, maybe these games are useful just to show, look, you can keep the position really locked and closed down and try and outmaneuver the opponent, even the exchange down. King's safety is very, very high here for black, it would seem. Bishop c3. The knight comes to a beautiful square. And then it kicks the queen. And now the rook goes to c4. Manoeuvring. Is gradually increasing central control now. Queen d6. b5. Making advances. Sealing squares like this. Maybe potentially going to play a5. Knight goes back to e4. Positional. More pressure on the c pawn now. Also f2. Look at this pressure mounting on white's position. e5. Central pawn mobility. d4. So, and now he finally wins the f pawn. So we have 2 pawns for the exchange. 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Black's only lost a single pawn. Central pawn mobility. The knights are getting even more dominant now. Knight d5. So white has no counterplay. Like Boris, look at white's pieces. There's nothing. It's really bleak just to watch this position get worse and worse. Knight c7, re-centralising the knight now to e6 to evict the queen. Queen is evicted. a5, just gradually making inroads. Offering the c pawn. Is white going to get some counterplay here? Offering the c pawn. Rook c1, is that the counterplay to win c6? Well, he takes on b2. And now, actually, just the move d3 is played anyway. There's no check here. The knight's guarding. But now, is this check here dangerous? It's extinguished. Queen d4. Powerful centralizing move. And d2 will follow. Did white have any attacking chances in this game? White resigned here. I think in the 2 games we've just seen, we've seen examples of positional exchange sacrifices for security. So it's almost an accelerated prophylaxis. Can we call it an accelerated prophylaxis using positional sacrifice? And in both instances he was getting also a centre pawn and central pawn mobility. So we've got central pawn mobility, king's safety, at least 1 or 2 pawns for the exchange, not really any concrete attack for the opponent at all, quite closed pawn structure with him having a lot of pawns still, Petrosian having a lot of pawns in both games, but still being able to gradually increase his advantages even with closed positions. Okay. So this was an interesting French defence game. So we'll have a look in overview and summary of this game. So this is how you could be playing the winner, especially against, if you're playing against a fearsome, aggressive player. It seems to be a neat idea. The whole variation seems to be neat. In fact, this whole variation doesn't really occur to me much. I'm usually playing the classical myself. So strategically, he's weakening the light squares, and it seems as though white was on the verge of a kingside attack, but then the well-timed positional exchange sack for security reasons. So the positional exchange sack here for security, and the king is actually literally blockading the f-pawn soon, quite amusingly. But we see just a gradual increase in advantages and the pawns becoming more mobile in the centre. So 2 pawns for the exchange, and white really probably being quite annoyed that there was nothing available to him, uses this final sort of attempt to get to Petrosian's king, but it's neatly kind of stopped with queen d4, which ticks all the boxes. You want, boxes. You want your pieces in the centre for maximum, influence around the board, and all the squares are covered. Even d8's covered by the knight anyway. So rook a7, that's covered. And then d2, that's, white's helpless. What's the queen doing over here? What's this doing? Mass decentralisation of pieces. White was totally smashed positionally. Okay, and he's helpless against d2. So let's have a look at another game. Okay. Whoops, that was WordPad. I had PGNs in WordPad too, so I meant to open Notepad. So against Viktor Korchnoi, okay, Moscow, Cannes Tournament, 1971. Petrosian playing white. Now, for me, this is kind of mysterious, very mysterious, and I wonder if any of you can prompt why such a strategy would have been be used. We know that Petrosian was heavily influenced by Nimzovich, and we saw the prophylaxis angles in the last two games. But what if this idea of the hypermodern view of the centre, that you could actually attack and undermine the centre later, let the opponent take the centre maybe, and try and explode it later? So as white, though, would you adopt such a strategy? So after c4, e5, he plays g3, so we're going to get one fianchetto, which will put bishop across the centre. But do we really want the idea of another bishop across the centre? Is this really an effective plan with white, if white's going to play b3 later? I wonder how many of you are tempted by a double fianchetto. I wonder how many of you play the English opening anyway. So we're seeing a hypermodern view of the centre in this game, because black occupies the centre now, classically, by playing the move c6, signalling the occupation is going to proceed with d5. The thing is, in that configuration, in this configuration of this pawn configuration here, if pressure is put on d5, well, what would happen if pressure is put on d5? Maybe black sometimes goes e4, correct? Black sometimes goes e4 and celebrates, oh, he's blocking the bishop, he's blocking the bishop, this bishop's less in scope. We can argue that. The problem is with this structure, imagine this structure. What's the problem with this structure? The problem with this structure is you've got your pawns on light squares. So what about these dark squares? They're weakened. If you've got a pawn on e4, you've weakened actually dark squares. So actually the idea of the fianchetto bishop here is perhaps working well with the fianchetto here to encourage this fianchetto, encourages pawns on light squares, which encourages in effect dark square weaknesses. So fianchetto in the other bishop, that bishop is causing food for this bishop, square food for that bishop, if you think about it. So b3 may be logical from that perspective. The double fianchetto may be logical. d5, so we have here Petrosian taking the Nimzovichian hypermodern school idea of exploding the centre later. He plays bishop b2, and if black tries to shut down this bishop, he ends up giving food to this bishop on the light squares. If d4 is played, then e4, the light squares potentially weakened. So d4, he's chosen that method. So we've got a nice bishop on g2 potentially. So knight f3, putting pressure on e5, bishop d6. Okay, d3. So one of the classic games in Fischer's run up to the match with Spassky, he had to beat Petrosian in the match, and he did manage to beat Petrosian with black. I think he sort of blocked in this bishop. He played c5, one of Fischer's famous wins over Petrosian in the candidates. But here, so c5 is played here. So we've got potentially dead bishop and a potentially alive bishop now on the light squares. Bishop g2. Knight e7, as though to keep the f pawn mobile, castling, maybe f5, e4 later, maybe possibly castles. Now knight ec6 actually. What are these knights doing? Why wouldn't the other knight go to c6? That's interesting. Korchnoi's got an interesting idea here. e3, and now he castles. Knight bd2. Okay, black really doesn't want to take hit, you know, be giving scope for, you know, white's rook. Potentially f5 would be useful. Bishop e6. And now a strange move, actually. A strange move indeed. I'm just going to... Hold on a sec. Sorry. A strange move, because really I've talked about this light square bishop, so why would he want to do this next move? He plays e4. What is the purpose of this move? Isn't he blocking in his own bishop? We've got this locked pawn structure, but as soon as black plays f5, now e takes, and white will get that very valuable e4 square. Unless black wants to try and prepare f5 slowly. Okay, so knight d7. Knight h4, look, the e4 square, the e4 pawn is a pivot for a knight f5. And also f4, f5, we've got a potential king's engine here, with this bishop maybe being able to slip back later, if needed. So we've got a kind of king's engine attack, with a safe, locked up pawn structure. So we've witnessed now game after game with these locked pawn structures. And probably these locked pawn structures are good against very, very tactical opponents, or computers even. Maybe, you know, you could last a few moves longer with such blocked positions against even an engine, possibly. Than say an open position where you get, you know, tactically destroyed quite quickly. So knight h4, g6. And the bishop, you know, is a bit bad actually. G6 potentially weakens some dark squares in the future. One can't envisage a major disaster at the moment. Bishop f3. What's the idea of bishop f3? He wants to get rid of black's bishop on e6. That bishop is complementary to the pawn chain. That light square bishop. It seems a logical strategic exchange. Bishop c7, but it's not actually choosing bishop g4 here. He plays a3. And this bishop a5 happens now. So is black getting a nice bishop here? Is that actually useful? Bishop c1. And now this strategic exchange of bishops is evident with bishop g4 now being played. So bishop c1 supported d2. You know, bishop g4, queen g4 without dropping d2. But black doesn't want the exchange. Victor doesn't want the exchange of light square bishops. He plays f5. The problem with f5 now is we're going to get e-fold pressure. We're going to get pressure on e5 as well. Takes, and it was also now opened up this bishop again on this diagonal. Knight f6, and we've got a kind of reverse Benoni if you think about it. Bishop g2, with, you know, white having potential for b4s later, but at the moment it's locked down. The b4 square is locked down by black. And one of the assets traditionally, or if you play the modern Benoni as black, you want to sort of get queenside pawn expansion, and that's one of your trump cards. But how will this b4 be achieved effectively if it's going to be a strategic goal of this game? Rook a d8. Now an amusing looking move, rook a2. So the rook, maybe from a2, it can swing to the centre later, and we can have doubled rooks on e5. Bishop c8. Rook e1, starting to mount pressure on e5. King h8. And now, look at this. b4, but surely b4 was covered by these guys. Everything was covering b4, surely. C takes b. Knight b3, threatening immediately to win a piece. Bishop takes c6 and knight a5. Immediate threat to win a piece. Bishop moves. But now if ab, surely we're just losing a pawn. You know, knight b4 or queen b4. If queen b4, actually bishop a3 skewing. So ab, you know, knight b4, you'd think hitting the rook. But actually bishop takes c6 is played. Which I don't know what you guys think, but this almost to me represents a positional sacrifice, giving up this beautiful bishop which traditionally is guarding sensitive key light squares. But what is he getting? He's getting more pressure on e5, because that was also a defender of e5. He's getting AB, because if queen b4, there's bishop a3. So he's getting his AB in, but at some cost. But is the centre fragile here? Where's the pawn mobility? You know, if f4, white can simply just play bishop takes f4. There's a nasty pin on the queen at the moment. a6, and now knight f3, putting more pressure on e5. And Victor is not tempted to play bishop c7 here, probably because knight takes d4. Because if rook d4, you know, knight d4, you know, there's a nasty pin. He can't play bishop c7 here. So he ends up having to play e4 now. c5. And now, you know, a centre pawn is dropping. So the hypermodern promise of being able to blow up the centre has been realised. The centre has been blown up. Knight f takes d4. But what of black's dynamism? The two bishops, you know, maybe f4, the king, the light squares. Do these mean anything here? c6 is immediately attacked. It's ignored. Queen f7, you know, maybe go for the hack attack if possible. Or is it? No, it's not ignored. Knight c6. There's queen. No, there isn't queen b3. I don't know. Knight c6. Maybe rook takes d3, hitting queen and knight. That's the point. He's not in any rush here. He plays rook d2, and now the c6 pawn does have to be defended, perhaps, as evidenced by this next move, bishop d7. And now finally that bishop, which was blocked in before, has got a lovely diagonal again. Look at this horrible, horrible diagonal. It's turned into a nightmare. The dream, the central occupation dream, has turned into a nightmare for black. All of these weaknesses now, this huge bishop on the diagonal, the committed pawn structure, just gaping dark square weaknesses everywhere. King comes off that sensitive diagonal, and now c6 is sadistically tortured again with knight a5, and it's difficult to start defending c6 here. So Victor gives up his dark square bishop, giving up the bishop pair, and this bishop isn't particularly happy on the same colour as the pawns here. So black looks totally positionally destroyed here. You know, the rooks are just ready, you know, in the centre. There's much more central control. This is a better bishop for the pawn chain, for king safety. White's king is totally looking much safer now than the black king. If we evaluate this position, the positional struggle is over. Black's looking for cheapos now. White's looking for a logical conclusion to finish the game, but black is looking for cheapos and any signs of counterplay he can get. Rook, you know, b8, bishop a1. We can see that a disaster is going to have to occur, either in the centre or in the dark squares soon. Rook d2 exerting more pressure in the centre. Queen h5. Is that actually the sign that this last move had a weakness? Is knight g4, is this guy going to be in trouble? Queen d2, calmly played. Now if knight g4 here, there's options to consider. Maybe the simplest is f3, you know, protecting laterally h2. So knight g4 actually wasn't played. King f7 was played. And now h4, restraining a bit the dark squares. E takes d3, queen takes d3. And there's nasty threats, you know, like check as well, you know, f5 pressure. f4, weakening even more squares. Knight f3. So there's a nasty threat now of knight g5 check as well. That h4 carries with it a hook for the knight to come to g5 for check. Rook takes e2, queen takes e2. Black's king safety has been shot to pieces. Not only has the centre collapsed, it's logically created, loads of weaknesses around his king. We've still got this huge bishop on the diagonal. Check. And the final little combination now is played. Knight takes d7. Check. And after knight takes d7, apparently Victor resigned. And I wonder if you can spot why Victor Korchnoi resigned here. I must confess, check with an engine just to make sure why he resigned. Black is totally lost here, but can you spot the winning move which might have been played here if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Anyone? It's a queen move. If you think of the centre, by the way, as a kind of springboard, that if your pieces visit the centre, they can spring, to other parts of the board, yeah? Say e5 is a springboard, isn't it? Yeah? Now, also, these squares are also potential springboards as well. I'm giving you a clue here. A slight clue there. So there's a springboard square near the centre. Where does this queen go? This is the second clue. Where's the queen go? Which square would you choose if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Some of you are saying queen g4 wrong. Some of you are saying queen e4 wrong. Because actually you've got to factor in king safety on the dark squares. That's another clue. King safety on the dark squares. There's a powerful dark square check as well, potentially to grab. Someone's finally said it. Actually, no, 2 people have said it. Pardon me. Omig, well done. Queen e6. Well done, Stefan23, Queen e6. Queen e6 is a springboard square, Queen e6. Because actually, Queen h6 is now threatened with a terminal threat of mate, actually. And how does Black defend this? He's also attacking the knight. It's end of game. Look how the centre has been totally opened up in that bishop. Amazing, isn't it? From the position we had, which was totally closed, for the centre to be blown up and White being able to just play casually a move on the springboard square, which just ends the game quietly. The king safety has been shot to pieces. It's a bit like when Petrosian beat Spassky. There's a classic game where all the weaknesses were totally exploited, and it seems Spassky had a promising position, but it just became a nightmare. So this is the hypermodern nightmare. Occupy the centre. The centre gets exploded later, and you end up with loads of weaknesses. Basically, closed pawn chain here. Strategic exchange possibility, because Black has committed his pawns to dark squares. That bishop's more valuable. The e4 provides f5, but also this idea of exchanging off strategically that bishop. So he goes for that strategic pawn exchange. But the other element of strategy here is the mobile pawns on the queen side. So the mobile pawns on the queen side are emphasized pretty soon after taking, with this nifty idea of bishop takes c6 after b4, which occurs. Bishop c6 now, which leaves the black pawns more vulnerable, and the queen side mobility is pretty dangerous, and there's more pressure, of course, on the queen side generally. So a6 putting another pawn on the light square. So it's just winning literally a pawn. He's just forcefully winning a centre pawn because there's just too much pressure and there's too many pins here. So he ends up winning this very valuable centre pawn, which clears, of course, the diagonal to the black king pretty soon. So black is just totally exposed here. This faint possibility of knight g4, I just think f3 would put an end to that. You know, if e3, maybe we can take pardon me, if e3, let's just make sure. Now I'm just questioning this variation. Do any of you know, what would you have played if knight g4? Okay, trivia quiz. What is a good idea for knight g4 if he was threatened with mate? How would you deal with this? I would have assumed it was f3. Someone say h4. I think that might be safer. You're right, because e3 looks like a strong reply. Pardon me. So h4 might have been on the cards, not f3, because he did play h4 pretty soon anyway. After king f7, he played h4 anyway. Okay. E takes, and the black king's really getting it here on the dark squares. He probably felt his position was fairly hopeless. So f4, and there's no time now. Things are going with tempo now after knight f3. This horrible check is going to win material. Rook e2, queen e2, queen c5, and now forcing simplification. Really getting rid of black's defensive pieces, so really emphasising more all the weaknesses, this exchange. So queen e6 would have been a decisive move, but Victor resigned after knight takes d7. So we have an impression in this game of an element of style, another aspect of hypermodern style, probably an influence of Nimzovich, about blowing up the centre, controlling the centre, or letting the opponent occupy and then you take it over later. Okay. So let's have a look at maybe one more game. Shall we have a look at just one more game, because it's been over an hour now. So just one more game. Is that okay? Okay. Mikhail Tal against Petrosian. This is topical. Doing weeks and weeks of Tal. How is Tal neutralised by Petrosian? 1973 Moscow. Weapon of choice against its tactical attacking player playing e4. I read some quotations earlier about Tal while asked why did he start drawing games. He says because his favourite squares, which included like f7, e7, g7, h7, his favourite squares were starting to be defended more and more by players, and probably that created draws. So c6 is a good weapon of choice. It was chosen by Botvinnik as well to try and get the title back from Mikhail Tal. So this is a solid weapon of choice in principle. d4, d5. Knight c3, takes on e4, and he plays the ultra solid variation, the ultra solid knight d7. Forget bishop f5 or knight f6. These are other possibilities. Knight d7, like favoured by Karpov, I think, quite a bit in some games. Knight d7, avoiding any double pawns. If white did want to take now on f6, you could take with the knight. Knight g5. So he temporarily blocks in his bishop with e6. Queen e2. So there's immediate, well, cheapo threats. They have to be defended. You know, these squares are vulnerable. So knight b6, defending e6, attacking the bishop. Tal doesn't want to lose his light square bishop. He plays bishop b3. And it doesn't seem like much of a concession to play bishop b3, but it's a potential tempo gain. Does black want to carry on developing pieces, or does he want to try and stretch out on the queen side? He plays a5. Okay, so immediate threat, you know, maybe a4. So a4 from white. Now the knight's kicked back to f3, but perhaps no big deal, because knight can reroute and the other one can come and it would still be okay, maybe. c5. Okay. Tal plays bishop f4. We see bishop d6 now. Not scared actually of white casting queenside at the moment. You'd think bishop d6 is a sort of scary move to play, but of course you know, if white has to do something about his bishop immediately. So bishop e5. And now just plays castle kingside, allowing castling queenside. So what of this d-file pressure potentially? What of this pawn taking? He sorts that out. He sacrifices for security here. A pawn sack for security. He plays c4, but also he's not even sacrificing a pawn because he's gaining a4. So the d-file is sort of being kept blocked. Bishop c4, knight takes a4. So black looks to be doing very well here, because now also look at Talsht king. It's not that safe. That pawn is potentially quite dangerous for undermining operations or even to queen. Knight h3. The knight goes back. So we've got this ridiculous pawn mobility threat, which seems too simple to be true. And what of the black king safety? Surely just rip open the g-file and mate the king, you might ask. After all, it's Tal playing white. g4. Are you scared as black here? Possibly Petrosian was a bit concerned, but he played a4 simply. g5. So white's going to achieve the goal quite quickly of a semi-open g-file to the black king. hg. Now if rook g1, it would be quite maybe g4. Maybe that isn't quite a sound sacrifice. Who knows? But whatever. Tal decided knight hg5 was sufficient. But now we have this pesky pawn again. a3. What is going on with this pawn? The thing is, the pawn is doing something strategically here, coming to a3. The dark squares after b3 are now weaker. Look, weaker. And we've still got some potential threats like this. Also, these knights are actually kind of coordinated for d5, a knight d5. A knight d5 is a good springboard for knight c3 and knight b4. So bishop b4. The threat now is bishop c3 and then a2 without allowing king b2. That would be quite embarrassing. Or would it? Rook d g1. So he seems to be inviting bishop c3 here. Okay, so a question for you guys. a2 in the game was played. Now, what was wrong with bishop c3? Shall we try and work it out? Is there something wrong with bishop c3 to carry the threat of a2? Is it too slow? We have got these guys sort of eyeing the black king here. So I guess it's just too slow. What knockout blow is available here? I think maybe just knight e4 on c3 and then on f6. That would be quite nasty, wouldn't it? Knight e4. So bishop c3 perhaps should be avoided. Would you agree? Bishop c3 is no good. Just simply knight e4 looks strong. d5 someone says. Okay, so in the game actually the quicker move, a2, just threatening checkmate actually in one, because the bishop is cutting off d2. So actually this is threatening mate. But it is allowing king b2. Okay, is black's attack quicker than Tal's attack? He does play a forcing check. Knight takes c4 check. And now his bishop's attacked. And he has got maybe a tempting check, but you know, maybe Tal could play king a1, end of game. So he actually plays knight d5, which carries with it again a nasty threat. Bishop c3 and then a1, very quick. So bishop c3 has to be parried. Knight e4, parrying that, and also g7 is under fire. So g7 has to be parried. f6 defending. Now here, you might think this is looking a bit of a crazy move by Mikhail. He actually played bishop f4, and I did engine check this game earlier. Actually, white is completely lost here, apparently, in this position. It's completely lost. It didn't matter if he had played bishop g3. Because basically, in this position, f5 is winning. Because if this knight moves, then bishop c3, it's end of game. So Tal played bishop f4. And we have another forcing check, bishop a3 check, and simply taking that bishop on f4 now. Where is Tal's attack? He hasn't got time, it seems, for his attack to break through. He plays h4, and now rook f7, defending even more his king. Rook g4. Does he have to move the knight? No. He plays a really nifty move here, really super quick move, which decides the game immediately, kind of. I wonder if you can spot it. So you don't. The clue is you don't need to move the knight. So if I give you 10 seconds here, what move would you play here as black? So 10 seconds starting from now. There might actually be more than one winning move. I thought this is pretty neat actually, so I'll show you. He plays queen a5. So the threat now of queen a5, well, say takes, is I believe bishop b2. So king takes, you've got a1 mating. Not sure there's too much of a defense here for white. So it also, the damage was done just with the a pawn, if you think about it in this game. So after queen a5, Mikhail resigned. So let's have a look in overview and summary of this game. So it seems a lot of damage was simply done winning the a pawn. Amazing. That black's a pawn played such a decisive role, and he proved his attack to be quicker than Mikhail Tal's attack on his own king. He even gave Mikhail Tal a seemingly promising, semi-open g-file. So it seems that black's winning the attacking race in this position. I don't know if you guys would have thought of that immediately, that black is winning the attack race here. Well, from the evidence of this game anyway, it seems as though black's attack runs quicker. So a4, he punches the dark squares, and this a pawn is still playing, an aggressive role. He just basically cleared away the path for his queen to come to a5 there. Knight d5, facilitating bishop c3 as a threat, driving a knight back. f6. So that's the end of white's attack on g7. Bishop f4. And he just plays check. Takes. And Mikhail didn't get his attack started, just queen a3. Petrosian's attack is running with checks. So that's it. So I thought those games were interesting. Maybe we could look at some, either Petrosian again next week or switch back to Tal. Maybe we could have some variety. What would you guys prefer next week? Petrosian or Tal? Or someone else? Yeah, so I think that's a lot to take in. I'm going to put this video on YouTube if you want to see and review the video, or it'll be here on the Play Chess server. So it'll probably be Tuesday next week, back to normal Tuesday. Yeah, I was thinking of Bronze League, but I think Petrosian's got a very interesting kind of contrasting style to Tal. So I thought for a balanced diet, we need attacking knowledge, and we need defensive knowledge as well, prophylaxis knowledge. So I'm giving you a balanced diet here of Tau and Petrosian. Okay. Thanks very much. Okay, so see you next week. Thanks very much.